Welcome to the experience of watching our film. Please realize that this process took us much time, like pottery sitting in a kiln. We do not mean to offend, as some of this film is in jest, but we have worked hard and put in an effort that is our very best. Now sit back and relax and be quiet.
Dave, seriously, be quiet.
Greetings. We are working on a film.
What are you doing with your hand? Oh, excuse me. Sorry to myself. Okay, here we go. Southern Appalachia is home to a mixed mesophytic forest, one of the world's most biologically diverse temperate forests of the world. The beautiful Appalachian woodland that we see today has changed completely from what it once was, and it could be argued that the forests are not what they once used to be.
Walking through the woods, there is a story to read of the way this land has been used. If you asked historians what the woods of Appalachia looked like when the first settlers arrived, they would tell you about trees tens of feet in diameter and so tall that today's tallest trees would have only been secondary in their canopy height. So where did these giants of the past go?
How did they disappear?
It's important to remember that before the European settlers came into the area, native indigenous people such as the Shawnee, Choctaw, Creek, and Cherokee had already been living off the land for thousands of years. The European settlers had changed the forest dynamics drastically during the 15 and 1600s, but the land they were tinkering with had already been changed before their arrival. It's a common misconception to believe the Spanish explorers were coming to North America and seeing an untouched natural and pristine wilderness. This stigma may have been because of the light tread the Indians had on the land and their transparencies within the forest themselves. Either way, the Native Americans had a big impact on the land and played a large role in the beginning of a long journey to the human disturbance of Appalachian ecosystems. The two most common logging practices were small-scale cuttings and periodically controlled burnings. Natives would intentionally burn the forest understory to promote growth of wanted medicinal plants and would also allow them to see long distances through the forest for better hunting. They also practiced shifting cultivation for the agricultural productions, cropping areas to obtain the nutrients until there were none left, then leaving that area behind to allow growth to regenerate on its own after their use. This led them to have a very special connection to the land as they would come back to the overgrown areas to restart this process. The tribes would burn trees like maple, birch, and beech, leaving the thicker barked trees such as chestnut, oak, and hickory. This is why these were the more prevalent species of the European settlement era. There was a new ecological palette for the settlers to interact with. Wood has always been one of humans' most used and valuable resources. During the 18th and 19th centuries, settlers viewed timber as their most important tool for the self-sufficient lifestyle they lived. Early logging practices consisted mostly of small clear-cuts for the homesteads and for the construction of log cabins. With the turn of industrialization, logging became a profession. Southern Appalachia was sought out for its resources of lumber from the northeast. With the coming of the railroads in the 1800s, lumber became one of Appalachia's greatest resources. This resulted from the region's forest, both rich in hard and in soft woods. With this change came a new pattern of consumption which permanently changed the economy of Appalachia. Railroads opened up the opportunity for vast tracts of Appalachian timber to be harvested for the industrial needs of the Northeast and the Midwest of the United States. Those regions' sufferings from the depletion of their own forest resources sought out new virgin forests, and Appalachia had just what they needed. This movement brought large logging companies into West Virginia, Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, exploiting the rich resources of the region. American hardwoods at the time were much prized both in the United States and in Europe. In turn, the commercial interests in Appalachia encourage railroads and logging firms alike to secure the control of the bountiful region and its resources. Just to give some perspective of the degradation done to the region, as Ronald Lewis points out in his book, by 1880, ancient growth forests still covered 2/3 of West Virginia, but by the 1920s, lumbermen had stripped the entire region. Eventually, the land was stripped to a similar state as the Northeast.
So, between the chestnut blight, industrial forestry, and catastrophic fires, the forests that we know now are mostly similar age, mostly even aged, and they're of a different species composition than what was here when we got here. The two main logging practices occurring today are clear cutting and high grading, or selection harvest, and neither of those really mimic the natural disturbance regime that is occurring in the region. You know, the practices need to change, or the implementation of the practices need to change, awareness and education needs to change, but economics needs to change as well. Economic considerations, the market needs to change so that it's affordable to do this kind of work. The silviculture is a science about understanding how forest dynamics work, and using that understanding of dynamics and the understanding of natural disturbance patterns to accomplish the objectives you're trying to accomplish. That's forestry. The extractive kind of logging without any understanding of forest dynamics or any intention for what was going to happen once the trees were removed. I mean, they just thought there were so many trees we could never take them all, and we didn't have to really worry about the future. And that's still happening now, like I said, where...
Perplexed by the so-called wisdom that Schwann Short shared with us, we sought out the guidance of North Carolina's wisest historian for his advice on how to move forward.
Dr. Keith, moving into the future, what do you suggest we do with our Appalachian forests?
In my younger, more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he said, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we were always unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood he meant a great deal more than that.
Dr. Keith, could you answer my question?
Well, reading the forested landscape in the future, I think it will be crucial for us to first examine the past while analyzing the various power structures that have shaped the landscape.
Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, that's enough of that.
To sustain healthy forests into the future, the general mentality needs to shift. The practices of logging and forestry can no longer be thought of as separate. To positively move forward, we must step back and remember the crucial connection that humans and nature have with one another. Just in the way that the forests provide for us, we must give back and learn to provide for the natural world. This proactive mentality will result in progressive management. Progressive management requires an understanding of the ecological patterns of the local region. Because our lifestyles rely so heavily on the resources of timber, the way in which forests are managed will dictate the resources we have in our future.
When she laughs, the piano in the hall plays a quiet note. Waterfalls turning gentle into rough and gentle. She's yesterday's garden, ready for today. Rocking chair, still